I stared at the woman standing in our company break room, her hand resting protectively over the small but unmistakable bump beneath her blouse. The words she'd just spoken hung in the air between us. "I just wanted to meet you, since you're Jason's wife. I'm Vanessa." The fluorescent light suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh, as my vision tunneled to that gentle curve of her belly. 6 months since Jason had deployed, 4 since he'd returned with a distant look in his eyes, 2 since he'd moved out of our house claiming he needed space to process everything. Now I understood exactly what kind of processing he'd been doing. Someone touched my shoulder. Kim from accounting, concern etched on her face. "Dr. Ramirez, the transition team is waiting in the conference room. The director said they can't start without you. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes," I managed, needing a moment to compose myself, to push down the emotions threatening to crack my professional veneer. The irony was almost too perfect. This woman, this Vanessa, had no idea that in exactly 3 days, I would be announced as the new medical director of Veterans Recovery Services, overseeing the entire rehabilitation center, including the physical therapy department, where both she and my soon-to-be ex-husband worked. I turned to the windows of the third-floor break room, gazing out at the San Diego coastline. The view had always helped ground me, remind me of how far I'd come. At 36, I was now about to become the youngest medical director in the center's history. My appointment the culmination of years of specialized work in trauma recovery and PTSD treatment. The announcement had been kept quiet, part of a larger restructuring initiative that would be revealed at next week's staff meeting. Only the board and a handful of administrators knew. Jason wasn't one of them. Jason, who had returned from his final tour in Afghanistan with a medical discharge and shattered confidence. Jason, who had taken a position as a physical therapist at the very center where I'd been building my career as a neuropsychologist for 7 years. Jason, who apparently had gotten another woman pregnant while we were still officially married. I smoothed down my navy blue blazer, checked my reflection in the window glass, and straightened my shoulders. Now was not the time for personal matters. I had a department to run, and in 3 days, an entire medical center. The conference room fell silent as I entered. 8 pairs of eyes watched me take my position at the table. The transition team respected me, some grudgingly at first, others immediately, but all had come to recognize my expertise in treating veterans with complex trauma. "Good morning, everyone. Let's begin with the quarterly progress reports," I said, my voice steadier. Then I felt. The meeting progressed smoothly. Patient outcomes, treatment protocols, staffing requirements. We moved through the agenda with practiced efficiency. When we reached the item about the new integrated care initiative, I felt a twist in my stomach. The physical therapy department has shown remarkable results with the pilot program, said Dr. Winters, our current director who was retiring next month. Their holistic approach to working with PTSD patients while addressing physical injuries is quite promising. We should consider expanding their resources. I nodded and kept my expression neutral. "Who's heading the physical therapy team for this initiative?" "Jason Ramirez," replied Winters. "He's been exceptional since joining us last year. His background as a veteran himself gives him unique insight, and the new therapist, Vanessa Chen, has brought innovative techniques from her work at Walter Reed." Vanessa Chen. Now I had a last name to go with the face and the baby bump. 4 months pregnant by my estimation, which meant she'd gotten pregnant while Jason was still living in our house, still wearing his wedding ring, still kissing me goodbye each morning. "I'll want a meeting with the physical therapy team next week," I said, keeping my voice even. "Let's schedule it for Monday morning." Dr. Winters looked surprised. "You want to meet with the entire PT department? That's unusual for this stage of planning." I met his gaze levelly. "This integration is crucial to our long-term treatment goals. I want to ensure that our approaches are truly aligned across disciplines. Any concerns?" "No, not at all," Winters backpedaled. I'll set it up for 9 a.m. Monday. As the meeting continued, my mind kept drifting to the confrontation in the break room. Vanessa had sought me out deliberately. She knew who I was, knew I worked here. Did she know about my promotion? Did Jason? The center wasn't large, about 120 staff members total, but our departments rarely overlapped directly. I had managed to avoid running into Jason most days, and he had seemed equally determined to maintain that distance. My phone vibrated silently in my pocket. I discreetly checked it under the table. Jason. We need to talk. Today. I ignored Jason's text. Whatever he wanted to discuss could wait until I'd processed the shock of meeting his pregnant girlfriend. By the time the executive meeting concluded, I had regained my equilibrium. This was business, not personal. Monday would be challenging, but I hadn't risen to my position by allowing emotions to cloud my judgment. As the executives filed out, Marcus Chen, our legal counsel, lingered behind. No relation to Vanessa, as far as I knew, but the coincidence of the last name felt like another twist of the knife. Sophia, do you have a moment? He asked once we were alone. Of course, Marcus. What's on your mind? I gestured toward the chair, across from me. He hesitated, which was unusual for him. Marcus was known for his direct approach and unflappable demeanor. I've just been reviewing the personnel files for the rehabilitation teams, he began carefully. I noticed something that might be complicated. My heart rate picked up, but my expression remained neutral. Go on. Jason Ramirez is your husband, isn't he? I hadn't changed my professional name after marriage, remaining Dr. Sophia Ramirez. Professionally, so the connection wasn't immediately obvious from paperwork alone. But Marcus and I had worked together for years, and he'd attended our wedding reception 5 years ago. Estranged husband? I corrected. We separated 2 months ago. Marcus nodded, his expression guarded. And there's a therapist in his department, Vanessa Chen. She's, well, from what I understand, pregnant with his child. I finished flatly. Yes, I'm aware. I just met her today, in fact. Marcus winced slightly. I'm sorry, Sophia. That's a difficult situation personally, but professionally speaking, it creates a potential conflict of interest once your appointment is announced. The board should be informed. I agree, I said, surprising him. I've already drafted a memo detailing the situation and the steps I'll take to ensure there's no impropriety. Dr. Winters will continue to oversee all performance reviews and compensation decisions regarding Jason's department, and I'll recuse myself from direct management of physical therapy as much as practical. Marcus looked impressed. You've thought this through. I don't allow personal matters to interfere with professional responsibilities, I replied. It was the mantra I'd lived by for the past several months. Fair enough. But Sophia, his voice softened slightly. Monday's meeting with the PT department will be challenging. Are you prepared for that? Was I prepared to face the man who had walked out on our marriage claiming he needed space to process his combat experiences, only to apparently find comfort in someone else's arms? The man who had dismissed my concerns about our growing distance as me being too analytical about everything? Completely prepared, I said with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. This is business, Marcus. Nothing more. After he left, I turned back to the window, watching seagulls circle over the Pacific. My phone buzzed again with another text message. Jason. Please, Sophia. It's important. I know Vanessa talked to you. Let me explain. 5 texts in rapid succession from Jason. After 2 months of minimal contact, now he was desperate to talk. I typed a response, deleted it, then typed again. Me. In meetings all day. Can't talk now. His reply came quickly. Tomorrow then. Coffee? I need to tell you something important before you hear it elsewhere. I almost laughed. Before I heard it elsewhere? The evidence of his infidelity had literally introduced herself to me, complete with the physical proof growing inside her. What more could there possibly be to hear? Me. Fine. 7 a.m. at Cornerstone Cafe. Jason. Thank you. I'll be there. I put my phone away, trying to focus on the stack of reports on my desk, but my mind kept returning to Vanessa Chen. Why had she sought me out? If she knew I was Jason's wife, she must also know we were separated. Was it some misguided attempt at honesty? A territorial marking? Or something else entirely? My train of thought was interrupted by a knock at my door. Kim from accounting stood there holding a manila folder. Sorry to bother you, Dr. Ramirez, but these requisition forms need your signature before 5, and I'm heading out early today. I gestured her in, grateful for the distraction. As she placed the folder on my desk, she hesitated. Is everything okay? You seemed pretty shocked in the break room earlier. I'd known Kim for years. We occasionally ran together on weekends. But I maintained professional boundaries with all my colleagues. Still, her concern seemed genuine. Just an unexpected personal matter, I said, keeping my tone light. Nothing to worry about. Kim nodded, but her expression remained concerned. Well, if you need anything, or just someone to talk to, I'm here. Thank you, Kim. I appreciate that. I signed the forms and handed them back, effectively ending the conversation. When she left, I opened my laptop and pulled up Vanessa Chen's personnel file. I'd never had reason to look at it before. The physical therapy department wasn't under my purview. The file showed she'd been hired 4 months ago, transferring from Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda. Excellent credentials. Specialized in rehabilitation for combat injuries. 32 years old, 3 years younger than me. Her photo showed a woman with warm brown eyes, olive skin, and a bright, confident smile. The timeline was now painfully clear. Jason had returned from Afghanistan 6 months ago. Vanessa had arrived at our center 2 months later. They must have started seeing each other almost immediately. And now, 4 months after her arrival, she was visibly pregnant. My husband had wasted no time at all. I arrived at Cornerstone Cafe at 6:45 the next morning, deliberately early to secure the corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. The small coffee shop was just beginning its morning rush, the air rich with the scent of espresso and fresh pastries. I ordered a black coffee, needing the bitter strength rather than my usual latte. Jason arrived 5 minutes early, another military habit he hadn't shed. I watched him scan the cafe, his posture still parade ground perfect, shoulders squared beneath his casual blue button-down. When he spotted me, something flickered across his face. Relief, perhaps, or apprehension. He stopped at the counter, to order before joining me, giving me a moment to steel myself against the familiar way he moved, the memories it evoked. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, setting down his coffee and taking the seat across from me. Close up, I could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "You said it was important," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I assume it's about your girlfriend introducing herself to me yesterday." He winced, his fingers tightening around his cup. "Sophia, I'm sorry you found out that way. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you that you got another woman pregnant while we were still living together?" I interrupted, ice creeping into my tone despite my resolve to remain calm. "Yes, I imagine that would be difficult to phrase in a text." "It's not what you think?" he said, then grimaced at his own words. "I mean, it's complicated." "Not from where I'm sitting. The timeline seems remarkably straightforward." Jason took a deep breath, running a hand through his close-cropped hair, a gesture I once found endearing, but now recognized as his tell for deep discomfort. "Vanessa and I met at a veteran support group," he began. "Off campus, not at the center. This was about 5 months ago, when I was really struggling with the transition back. She was facilitating the group. She's done a lot of work with combat veterans." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "We became friends." Just friends, Sophia, I swear. I was still committed to making our marriage work. But I was also drowning, and you and I, we weren't connecting. I couldn't make you understand what I was going through. I'm a neuropsychologist who specializes in combat trauma, I said flatly. I understand PTSD better than most. That's just it, he countered, leaning forward. At home, you were my wife, not my doctor. I needed you to be my wife. But you kept analyzing me, treating me like one of your patients instead of your husband. The accusation stung because it carried a kernel of truth. I had struggled to separate my professional knowledge from our personal relationship after his return. So, you found comfort elsewhere, I concluded. He shook his head. It wasn't like that. Not at first. After I moved out, yes, Vanessa and I grew closer. But the pregnancy, that wasn't planned. It was a complete surprise to both of us. A surprise that's approximately 4 months along by my estimation, I observed. Which means it happened around the time you moved out, not after. Jason's expression crumpled slightly. It was one time, Sophia. One mistake, the night before I told you I needed space. I was at my lowest point, convinced our marriage was already over because I couldn't be the man you needed. I absorbed this. The timeline shifting slightly, but the betrayal no less acute. And now? Now we're trying to make it work. For the baby's sake, he said quietly. I was going to tell you everything, but then Vanessa took the position here, and things got complicated. When she realized you worked at the same facility, she insisted on meeting you directly. She thought it was the right thing to do. How considerate, I said, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. Is she aware that you and I are still legally married? Yes, she knows everything. And she knows I'm filing for divorce. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between us. These are the papers. I was going to bring them by this weekend. I stared at the envelope, the word petition visible through the paper. After 5 years of marriage, it came down to this: an envelope in a coffee shop, pushed across the table like an afterthought. There's something else you should know, Jason continued, his voice dropping. Vanessa has been offered the lead position for the new integrated trauma recovery program. The announcement is supposed to come at Monday's staff meeting. I kept my expression carefully neutral, though my pulse quickened. Monday's meeting, the same one where my appointment as medical director would be announced. Congratulations to her, I said evenly. That's a significant achievement. Jason studied my face, clearly puzzled by my calm reaction. I wanted you to hear it from me, not through center gossip. I know how hard you've worked on trauma recovery protocols. I thought you might have been in consideration for that program leadership. Little did he know that I would soon be overseeing all programs, including his and Vanessa's. The irony was almost too perfect. His guilt had led him to reveal information that would have otherwise caught me off guard on Monday. I appreciate the heads up, I said, reaching for the divorce papers. Is there anything else I should know before I review these? Just that I never meant to hurt you, Sophia. None of this went the way I planned. I slipped the envelope into my bag without opening it. Life rarely does, Jason, especially when we make choices without considering their consequences. I spent the weekend reviewing the divorce papers and preparing for Monday's revelations. The petition was straightforward. Irreconcilable differences, cited as the cause. A fair division of our modest assets proposed. No alimony requested by either party. Jason had been reasonable in his terms, which somehow made it all the more painful. There was no fighting left to do, just paperwork to process and a life to reconstruct. By Sunday evening, I had signed the papers, made copies for my records, and placed the originals in my briefcase to return to Jason. I had also prepared extensively for the staff meeting, reviewing all departmental reports and rehearsing exactly how I would handle the inevitable awkwardness when both announcements were made. I arrived at the center an hour early on Monday, wanting to settle into my office and gather my thoughts before facing the day's challenges. The building was quiet, just security and a few early arrivals preparing for their shifts. I nodded to the night guard as I made my way to my office, the weight of the divorce papers in my bag feeling heavier than their actual mass. As I rounded the corner to the administrative wing, I was surprised to see Dr. Winters standing outside my door, a concerned expression on his lined face. "Sophia, good, you're early. We need to talk before the meeting." He gestured toward his office further, down the hall. Once inside with the door closed, he didn't waste time on preliminaries. "There's been a complication with the integrated trauma program. The board chair called an emergency session last night." My stomach tightened. "What kind of complication?" "It seems there's a potential conflict of interest that wasn't previously disclosed." Winters leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. "Vanessa Chen was recommended for the program lead by her former supervisor at Walter Reed, a Dr. Michael Lowry." I recognized the name immediately. Lowry was a prominent figure in military rehabilitation medicine, his endorsement carrying significant weight. "What wasn't disclosed," Winters continued, "was that Lowry and Chen had been in a relationship while at Walter Reed, one that apparently ended when she transferred here." I sat back, absorbing this new information. "How did this come to light?" "Anonymous email to the board chair with documentation, text messages, photos. Ugly business." Winters shook his head. "The board is concerned about the ethics of her appointment now, especially since she didn't disclose the relationship during her hiring process here." The implications clicked into place immediately. If Vanessa had been involved with Lowry while at Walter Reed, then left him for Jason, the timeline I had constructed needed serious revision. "Does this affect my appointment as medical director?" I asked, focusing on the professional implications rather than the personal revelations swirling in my mind. "No, your position is secure. But the integrated program leadership is now on hold, pending an ethics review. I wanted you to know before the meeting so you aren't blindsided." He paused, studying my face. "There's something else, Sophia. The board knows about your relationship to Jason Ramirez and his connection to Chen. They want assurance that you can handle this complicated dynamic professionally. As I outlined in my memo, I'll recuse myself from any direct oversight of their departments," I replied evenly. "My personal situation won't affect my professional judgment." Winters nodded. "I conveyed as much. For now, the board has decided to announce only your appointment today. The program leadership announcement will be delayed." After he left, I sat at his desk, trying to piece together this new information. If Vanessa had been involved with Lowry at Walter Reed, when exactly had things started with Jason? And why had she sought a position at our center specifically? The coincidence seemed too convenient now. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search for Dr. Michael Lowry. His profile on the Walter Reed website showed a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and an impressive list of credentials. Further searching revealed he was married, had been for 20 years, to a prominent neurologist. The picture was becoming clearer, and it wasn't flattering for Vanessa. Moving from a married superior to my married husband suggested a pattern, not a coincidence. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "Heard about emergency board meeting. What's going on?" I set my phone down without replying. Whatever was happening with Vanessa's appointment wasn't my information to share, though I wondered how quickly the gossip would spread through the center. By the time the all-staff meeting was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m., the conference room was filled to capacity. I sat near the front, beside Marcus Chen from legal, who gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. Jason and Vanessa entered together, taking seats toward the back. She looked pale, her hand unconsciously protective over her belly. Jason's eyes found mine briefly, a question in them that I didn't acknowledge. Dr. Winters called the meeting to order promptly, thanking everyone for their attendance before launching into the prepared agenda. I listened attentively, focusing on maintaining a composed expression as he worked through various administrative announcements. And now, I have an important leadership transition to announce. Winters said, his voice taking on a more formal tone. As many of you know, I'll be retiring at the end of next month after 15 years as medical director of this center. Following an extensive search and review process, the board has selected our new medical director, who will begin the transition immediately. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward various department heads, the most likely candidates in most people's estimation. From the back of the room, I could feel Jason's gaze specifically, probably assuming I was disappointed about missing out on the integrated program leadership. It is my great pleasure to announce that Dr. Sofia Ramirez will be taking over as medical director effective immediately. The conference room erupted in applause, some enthusiastic, some perfunctory. I smiled professionally, scanning the faces of my colleagues as I stood to accept the position. When my gaze reached the back of the room, I found Jason staring at me, his expression a complex mixture of shock, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Beside him, Vanessa had gone completely still, her hand frozen over her baby bump as the color drained from her face. "Thank you, Dr. Winters, and thank you all for your support," I said, keeping my voice steady as I addressed the room. "I'm honored to accept this position and look forward to building on the excellent foundation Dr. Winters has established. My door is always open as we work together to provide the best possible care for our veterans." I kept my remarks brief and focused on unity and collaboration, avoiding any hint of the personal complications that now permeated the center's leadership structure. As I finished, Dr. Winters stepped forward to discuss the transition timeline and other administrative details. Throughout the remainder of the meeting, I could feel Jason's eyes on me, but I deliberately avoided looking in his direction again. When the meeting adjourned, staff members filed out in small groups, many stopping to congratulate me personally. I accepted their well wishes graciously, fully aware that Jason and Vanessa remained seated, apparently waiting for the room to clear. Marcus lingered nearby, a subtle but appreciated buffer. "Congratulations, Dr. Ramirez," he said formally once. Most people had left. "The legal department looks forward to working with you in your new capacity." "Thank you, Marcus. I'll need to schedule time with you this week to review several pending matters." He nodded, understanding my implied request for continued presence. "I'm available whenever you need me." Before we could continue, Jason approached, still looking somewhat dazed. Vanessa trailed behind him, her professional composure noticeably strained. "Sofia, Dr. Ramirez," Jason corrected himself, awkwardly navigating our new professional reality. "Congratulations on your appointment. I had no idea you were being considered for medical director." "Thank you, Mr. Ramirez," I replied, deliberately, using his formal title. The search process was confidential until the board made their final decision. Vanessa stepped forward, extending her hand with visible effort. "Congratulations, Dr. Ramirez. I look forward to working under your leadership." The choice of words, "under your leadership," clearly cost her something to say. I shook her hand briefly, noting her clammy palm against my steady grip. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. I believe we have a physical therapy department meeting scheduled for later this morning, correct?" "Yes," she confirmed, her voice slightly strained. "At 11. "I'll see you both there then," I said dismissively, turning back to Marcus to signal the end of our interaction. Jason hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but after a moment's indecision, he nodded and guided Vanessa toward the exit. As they walked away, I could see them engaged in intense, whispered conversation, their body language tense and urgent. "Well, handled," Marcus murmured once they were out of earshot. "Very professional." "It's going to be a long transition period," I acknowledged, gathering my materials from the conference table. "The board is impressed with how you're managing the situation," he offered. "The chairman mentioned it specifically during last night's emergency session." "About that," I said, lowering my voice. "Is there anything else I should know about Ms. Chen's situation? As medical director, I need to be fully informed about potential ethical concerns among my staff." Marcus glanced around to ensure we were truly alone. The inquiry is ongoing, but preliminary evidence suggests Ms. Chen may have misrepresented her qualifications and experience in her application materials. The recommendation from Dr. Lowry appears to have been secured under questionable circumstances. See, I said, processing this new information. And the integrated program leadership? Currently on hold. The board is considering several alternatives, including restructuring the program entirely. I nodded, understanding the implications. Please keep me updated on the investigation. I'll need to make staffing decisions based on the outcome. Back in my office, soon to be relocated to the more spacious medical director's suite, I found a congratulatory bouquet from the administrative staff and a stack of transition documents waiting on my desk. I had barely settled in when my assistant knocked on the door frame. Dr. Ramirez, I have your new schedule and the files Dr. Winters wanted you to review before the department meetings today. She paused, then added with a small smile, and there's quite a line forming of people wanting to speak with you. Thank you, Denise. Please give me 15 minutes to review these materials, and then I'll start seeing people. Priority to department heads. Alone again, I opened my laptop to review the physical therapy department's performance metrics before the 11 o'clock meeting. The department was objectively performing well, with patient satisfaction scores consistently above 90% and recovery, outcomes exceeding national averages for similar facilities. Whatever personal complications existed, the professional work was excellent. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. We need to talk privately before the PT meeting. Important. I considered ignoring it, but professionalism won out. I responded simply, my office, 10:45, bring any relevant department materials. His reply came immediately. Thank you. At precisely 10:45, Jason knocked on my door, a folder of documents in hand as requested. The pretense of a professional meeting would allow us both to maintain appearances if anyone saw him entering my office. Come in, Mr. Ramirez, I called, remaining seated behind my desk rather than rising to greet him. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably, and we both knew it. Jason closed the door behind him, then stood uncertainly for a moment before taking the chair across from me. I should have known, he said finally. All those late meetings, the confidential calls. I thought you were working on a research grant or something. Would it have changed anything if you'd known? I asked, genuinely curious. He considered this, then shook his head slowly. Probably not. We were already broken by then. What did you want to discuss before the department meeting? I kept my tone professional, steering us away from personal. Reflections. Vanessa, he said simply. She's falling apart, Sophia. The board investigation, your appointment, the pregnancy. It's too much stress all at once. I'm worried about her health and the babies. I studied Jason's face, searching for manipulation and finding only genuine concern. Whatever complicated feelings I had about their relationship, I couldn't dismiss legitimate health concerns for a pregnant staff member. What exactly are you asking of me? I inquired, keeping my tone measured. I'm not asking for special treatment, he clarified quickly. Just compassion. The ethics investigation has blindsided her. She claims the situation with Dr. Lowry at Walter Reed wasn't what it appears. And you believe her? I raised an eyebrow. Jason hesitated, betraying the first hint of doubt I'd seen. I want to. She says Lowry pursued her aggressively, implied her position would be jeopardized if she didn't respond to his advances. When she finally gave in, he promised to help advance her career if she maintained the relationship. That's a serious accusation, I noted. Sexual harassment and abuse of power. Has she filed a formal complaint? No, Jason admitted. She was afraid it would become a case of his word against hers, and he has significantly more influence in the field. I leaned back in my chair, considering the implications. If Vanessa was telling the truth, The situation was indeed more complex than it initially appeared. If she was lying, it demonstrated a disturbing pattern of using relationships for professional advancement. "The anonymous tip to the board," I said slowly. "Do you have any idea who might have sent it?" "Vanessa thinks it was Lowry himself," Jason replied. "She believes he's trying to sabotage her career because she ended things and left Walter Reed." "That's quite a claim," I observed, neither accepting nor dismissing it. "What does this have to do with our department meeting at 11? Jason shifted uncomfortably. "Vanessa is prepared to resign if necessary. She says she can't handle an extended ethics investigation while pregnant, especially now that you're—" He trailed off awkwardly. "Now that I'm her boss," I finished for him. "And you're trying to prevent that resignation?" "I'm trying to understand what we're walking into," he clarified. "Will the ethics investigation be discussed at the department meeting? Is her position in immediate jeopardy?" I considered my response carefully. As medical director, I needed to balance procedural integrity with staff well-being, personal history notwithstanding. "The department meeting will focus on operational matters and the leadership transition," I assured him. "The ethics investigation is being handled separately by the board and legal department. Her immediate position is not in jeopardy pending the outcome of that investigation." Relief flickered across Jason's face. "Thank you for being straightforward. That said," I continued, "if there are legitimate concerns about her health or the pregnancy, she should document them with her physician and submit any necessary accommodation requests through proper channels. I won't let personal history influence professional decisions in either direction." Jason nodded, understanding the double-edged nature of my statement. "That's fair." He stood to leave, then hesitated. "For what it's worth, I was proud when they announced your appointment. Whatever happened between us personally, you deserve this position." The unexpected affirmation caught me off guard. "Thank you," I said simply. After he left, I sat quietly for a moment, processing our conversation. The situation with Vanessa had more layers than I initially realized. If she had indeed been pressured by Lowry, her subsequent relationship with Jason could be viewed in a different light, perhaps as an attempt to find protection and stability after escaping a toxic situation, or it could be an elaborate manipulation, a pattern of using relationships for career advancement. The truth likely lay somewhere in between these extremes. I pulled up the center's staff directory and searched for Dr. Melanie Santos, our senior obstetrics consultant who came in twice weekly to support pregnant veterans and staff members. Finding her contact information, I sent a quick email. "Dr. Santos, as the new medical director, I'm reviewing our support systems for pregnant staff members. Could we schedule a brief meeting this week to discuss our current protocols? I want to ensure we're providing appropriate accommodations and resources." The PT department meeting began precisely at 11. I arrived last, a strategic choice to allow everyone to be settled before I entered. The room fell silent as I took my position at the head of the table. 8 physical therapists, including Jason and Vanessa, watched me with varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension. "Good morning, everyone," I began, keeping my tone professional but warm. "As you heard at the all-staff meeting, I'll be taking over as medical director effective immediately. I wanted to meet with each department personally this week to discuss the transition and address any questions you might have." I deliberately maintained eye contact with each therapist in turn, treating Jason and Vanessa no differently than the others. Vanessa looked pale but composed, her hands folded protectively, over her belly beneath the table. "Before we begin, I want to emphasize that my vision for this center involves strengthening collaboration between departments. The work you're doing in physical therapy, particularly with our PTSD patients, complements the cognitive and emotional support provided by my former department. I see tremendous potential for more integrated approaches." As I outlined specific initiatives and transition plans, I could see the tension in the room gradually easing. By focusing exclusively on professional matters and department strengths, I gave no indication of the personal complications involved, allowing everyone, including Jason and Vanessa, to engage solely as healthcare professionals. When the meeting concluded, I remained at the table as the therapists filed out, making a point to speak briefly with each one. Jason and Vanessa left together, neither attempting to engage me individually, which was precisely what I had hoped for. Professional boundaries established, personal matters deferred. The following week unfolded in a whirlwind of meetings, policy, reviews, and strategic planning sessions as I settled into my role as medical director. I deliberately immersed myself in work, finding that the demands of leadership provided a welcome distraction from the personal complications simmering beneath the professional surface. By Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing budget proposals in Tachwai, my new office, a spacious corner suite with views of both the ocean and the center's healing gardens, when my assistant announced that Dr. Melanie Santos had arrived for our scheduled meeting. "Send her in, please," I said, closing the budget files and rising to greet her. Dr. Santos entered with the confident stride of someone comfortable in her expertise. In her mid-50s with silver-streaked dark hair, she had been providing obstetric care at our center for over a decade, though our paths had rarely crossed professionally. "Congratulations on your appointment, Dr. Ramirez," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "It's about time this place had a woman at the helm." "Thank you, Dr. Santos. I appreciate you making time to meet with me." We settled into the small seating area by the window rather than across my desk, a deliberate choice to create a more collaborative atmosphere. "Your email mentioned reviewing support systems for pregnant staff members," she began. "Is there a specific concern I should be aware of?" I chose my words carefully, balancing transparency with discretion. "We currently have a staff member whose pregnancy may be experiencing additional stressors due to workplace circumstances. I want to ensure our protocols are robust enough to provide appropriate support without compromising professional standards." Dr. Santos nodded slowly, her experienced eyes studying my face. "This wouldn't happen to involve Vanessa Chen in physical therapy, would it?" I maintained a neutral expression. Patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing specific cases. "Of course," she agreed. "Though Ms. Chen isn't my patient, at least not officially. She's been seen at University Medical Center for her prenatal care." This was new information. Given Vanessa's position at our center with its excellent health care, benefits including on-site prenatal services, choosing outside care seemed unusual. "Speaking generally," Dr. Santos continued, clearly reading my interest, "pregnancy under stress can present significant health risks. Elevated cortisol levels can affect fetal development and increase the risk of preterm labor. For staff members experiencing unusual workplace stressors, we typically recommend modified duties, flexible scheduling, and regular monitoring." "What about staff under ethics investigations?" I asked, then clarified, "Hypothetically speaking." Dr. Santos considered this. "Hypothetically, I would recommend temporary reassignment to duties that minimize stress while maintaining professional engagement. Prolonged uncertainty is particularly detrimental during pregnancy." I nodded, making a mental note. "What about our current protocols for pregnant staff? Any areas you see for improvement?" We spent the next 30 minutes discussing the center's support systems. Dr. Santos provided valuable insights on everything from ergonomic considerations to psychological support resources, helping me formulate a more comprehensive approach that would benefit all pregnant staff members, not just Vanessa. As our meeting concluded, Dr. Santos paused at the door. "Dr. Ramirez, I hope you don't mind me speaking frankly, but this center thrives on relationships. Professional ones, of course, but human ones too. Whatever's happening with Ms. Chen, I trust you'll find the balance between maintaining standards and showing compassion." "That's precisely my aim," I assured her. "Thank you for your insights." After she left, I sat at my desk considering my next steps. The ethics investigation into Vanessa's credentials and her relationship with Dr. Lowry was proceeding, but it would likely take weeks to conclude. In the meantime, I needed to make decisions about the integrated trauma program and department, leadership that couldn't wait. My assistant interrupted my thoughts with a gentle knock. "Dr. Ramirez, Marcus Chen from Legal is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Marcus entered looking more unsettled than I'd ever seen him, clutching a folder with the center's confidential stamp across it. "We have a situation," he said without preamble. "Dr. Lowry has filed a formal complaint against the center, specifically naming Ms. Chen and, by extension, our hiring practices." "What kind of complaint?" I asked, immediately alert. "He claims we failed to perform due diligence in our hiring process, allowing someone with falsified credentials to treat vulnerable veterans." Marcus placed the folder on my desk. "He's threatening to go public with his concerns if we don't take immediate action against Ms. Chen." "That seems extreme for a professional disagreement," I observed. "What's his evidence of falsified credentials?" "That's where it gets complicated," Marcus said, opening the folder to reveal several documents. "He claims certain certifications she listed were never completed, and that her role at Walter Reed was exaggerated in her application materials." I scanned the documents, noting discrepancies highlighted between Vanessa's application and records Lowry had provided. "Have we verified these claims independently?" "We're trying, but some records require formal requests that will take time. Lowry is demanding action within 48 hours. This feels like blackmail," I said, my suspicion growing. "Has Ms. Chen been informed?" "Not yet. As medical director, you should be part of that conversation, given the sensitivity of the situation." I drummed my fingers on the desk, weighing options. "Let's verify what we can immediately. Check with the licensing boards directly. Those responses should come quickly. And I want to speak with Ms. Chen myself, with you present." "Today?" Marcus asked. I nodded firmly. "Today. This situation affects not just Ms. Chen, but potentially our entire treatment program for veterans. Let's get ahead of it." An hour later, Vanessa sat across from me in my office, Marcus beside her taking notes. Her face had lost the healthy glow typical of pregnancy, replaced by a pallor that accentuated the dark circles beneath her eyes. She hadn't come alone. Jason stood behind her chair, his presence technically inappropriate for a personnel matter, but one I'd allowed as a concession to her visible distress. "Ms. Chen," I began formally, "thank you for meeting with us on short notice. We've received some concerning information that requires immediate attention." Marcus slid a copy of Lowry's complaint across the desk. I watched her face as she skimmed the document, looking for signs of guilt or surprise. Her expressions cycled through shock, anger, and finally a resigned weariness that seemed to age her beyond her years. "These are lies," she said quietly, looking up from the paper. "Deliberate, calculated lies. Can you be more specific?" I prompted. "Which aspects are inaccurate?" "All of it." Her voice strengthened with conviction. "I completed every certification listed on my application. My role at Walter Reed was exactly as described. I can provide documentation for everything." "That would be extremely helpful," Marcus interjected. "Dr. Lowry has provided his own documentation suggesting otherwise." "Of course he has," she said, bitterly. "He's had months to prepare this, to alter records, to undermine me systematically." Jason placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Vanessa told me weeks ago that Lowry had threatened to destroy her career if she ever spoke about their relationship." I maintained a neutral expression, focusing on facts rather than emotions. "Ms. Chen, did you ever file a formal complaint against Dr. Lowry for harassment or inappropriate behavior while at Walter Reed?" She shook her head, eyes downcast. "No. I was afraid and ashamed. He was respected, powerful. I was just another therapist trying to build a career. It started with professional mentorship, then became more personal. When I tried to establish boundaries, he made it clear my position depended on maintaining the relationship. "Did anyone at Walter Reed know about the situation?" Marcus asked. "A few colleagues suspected, I think, but no one openly acknowledged it. Military medical circles are small. People don't risk their careers by challenging someone with Lowry's influence." I studied her carefully, weighing the story against what I knew of institutional dynamics in military medicine. Her account aligned with patterns I'd observed throughout my career. Powerful men using position to pressure vulnerable subordinates, systems designed to protect institutions rather than individuals, the calculated risk women took in speaking out versus remaining silent. "When did you end the relationship with Dr. Lowry?" I asked. 7 months ago, she answered without hesitation. "After he promised to leave his wife for me, then retracted it when I pressed for commitment. When I threatened to speak to his wife directly, he became frightening. That's when I applied for the transfer here, to get as far away as possible." "And your relationship with Mr. Ramirez?" I corrected myself, maintaining professional distance. Vanessa glanced up at Jason, then back to me. "We met at a veteran support group 4 months ago. I had no idea he was married to anyone at the center. By the time I realized the connection, things had already progressed between us." Her hand moved protectively to her belly. "The pregnancy wasn't planned, but we're committed to making it work." Jason stepped forward. "Sophia, Dr. Ramirez, I know how this looks, but Vanessa is telling the truth about Lowry. This is retaliation, pure and simple." I held up a hand to pause him. "Mr. Ramirez, while I appreciate your insight, this remains primarily a personnel matter between Ms. Chen and the center." Turning back to Vanessa, I continued more gently. "Do you have access to any evidence that might substantiate your claims about Dr. Lowry's behavior? Emails, messages, witnesses who might corroborate your account?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I kept everything. Emails where he implied professional consequences if I didn't meet him privately, text messages with explicit threats when I tried to end things. I was too afraid to use them before, but now..." She squared her shoulders, with newfound resolve. "I'll provide everything I have." "That would be extremely helpful," I acknowledged. "In the meantime, we need to address Dr. Lowry's immediate demands and the potential public relations implications." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "The board is concerned about negative publicity affecting veteran enrollment and donor support. They're suggesting administrative leave for Ms. Chen while we investigate." Vanessa's face fell, but before she could protest, I raised my hand again. "That's one option," I said deliberately. "Another is reassignment to non-clinical duties that utilize Ms. Chen's expertise while protecting both her and our patients during the investigation." "Reassignment to what?" Vanessa asked, a flicker of hope crossing her face. I had considered this carefully before the meeting. Our patient education materials for trauma recovery need significant updating. Your background in both physical therapy and psychological support makes you uniquely qualified to develop integrated resources that bridge those disciplines. You could work on that project, maintaining your salary and benefits while we resolve this situation. The relief on her face was palpable. I would welcome that opportunity. As for Dr. Lowry's 48-hour ultimatum, I continued, turning to Marcus, please inform him that we take all credentialing concerns seriously and are conducting a thorough investigation. However, we do not respond to arbitrary deadlines or threats. If he has legitimate concerns about patient care, he should present them through proper channels. Marcus nodded, making notes. And if he goes public with his allegations? Then we respond with appropriate transparency about our investigation process, without disclosing personnel details. I turned back to Vanessa. Ms. Chen, I need your documentation as quickly as possible, both your credential verification and any evidence regarding Dr. Lowry's behavior. I'll have everything to you by tomorrow morning, she promised. In the meantime, I added. I'd strongly recommend you consult with a personal attorney. While the center's legal team will address institutional concerns, you should have independent representation for the aspects that affect you personally. After Vanessa and Jason left, Marcus remained, his expression thoughtful. That was skillfully handled, he observed, particularly given the personal complications. The personal complications are irrelevant to the facts of the case, I replied, though we both knew it wasn't quite that simple. If Lowry is using his position to retaliate against a former subordinate, that's a serious ethical breach that extends beyond our center. And if Ms. Chen's credentials were misrepresented? Then we address that appropriately as well. But we investigate fully before drawing conclusions, regardless of who makes the accusation or under what circumstances. Marcus gathered his notes. The board will want an update by tomorrow afternoon. What should I tell them? Tell them the medical director is handling the situation according to established protocols, with full attention to both legal compliance and patient safety. I met his gaze directly. And that I'll provide a complete briefing once we have verified facts rather than accusations. I arrived early the next morning, wanting time to prepare before what promised to be a challenging day. The center was quiet, dawn light just beginning to filter through the windows as I made my way to my office. I found a thick manila envelope waiting outside my door. Vanessa's documentation, delivered as promised. For the next 2 hours, I methodically reviewed everything she had provided. Her credential verifications were thorough and appeared legitimate. Copies of certificates, transcripts, licensing documents, and letters of completion for specialized training programs. But it was the second folder that drew my complete attention: evidence of her relationship with Dr. Lowry, email threads with subtle professional threats when she attempted to establish boundaries, text messages that grew increasingly controlling, then explicitly threatening when she tried to end the relationship, photos of bruises she had documented after what appeared to be a physical altercation, a timeline of incidents that painted a disturbing picture of escalating abuse masked by professional mentorship. Most damning was a series of emails from Lowry after she had accepted the position at our center. They progressed from pleading to angry to outright threatening. You'll never work in military medicine again. I made your career, and I can destroy it just as easily. No one will believe you over me. Remember that before you try to spread lies. I know about your new relationship. Does he know what kind of woman you really are? Maybe he should. The final email had been sent just 1 week before the anonymous tip to our board. Last chance, Vanessa. Either you resign from San Diego and come back to a position I've arranged at Baltimore General, or I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about your credentials and character. You have 72 hours to decide. I sat back, processing everything. If these documents were authentic, and they appeared to be, then Vanessa had been telling the truth. Lowry's accusations were retaliatory, an attempt to force her return by destroying her credibility. My contemplation was interrupted by a knock at my door. Marcus entered looking grave, a tablet in hand. Lowry escalated overnight, he said without preamble. He sent this to several board members and local media outlets. He passed me the tablet displaying an email with the subject line, "Patient Safety Concerns at Veterans Recovery Services." The message contained allegations that our center had hired an unqualified therapist with falsified credentials, potentially endangering vulnerable veterans. While it didn't name Vanessa directly, the implications were clear enough for anyone familiar with recent hiring. Has any media outlet published this yet? I asked, scanning the email. Not yet. They're reaching out for comment first. The San Diego Tribune healthcare reporter has already contacted our communications department. I handed him Vanessa's folders. Review these immediately. Priority on verifying the credential documentation, but I want legal's assessment of the key. Other materials as well. I need your preliminary findings before the board meeting at 2. What about the media inquiries? Standard response for now? We take all patient safety concerns seriously and have robust verification processes in place. No specific comments on personnel matters or ongoing investigations. After Marcus left, I called our communications director and IT security team, putting additional protective measures in place. If Lowry was willing to go this far, we needed to prepare for further escalation. My next call was to Dr. Santos. I need a professional opinion, I explained after brief pleasantries. If a pregnant staff member is experiencing significant workplace stress due to an ethics investigation, what medical recommendations would you consider appropriate? Without examining the patient, I couldn't make specific recommendations, she replied cautiously. However, generally speaking, documented stress during pregnancy might warrant medical leave, particularly in the second trimester when development is critical. Would you be willing to consult if the staff member were agreeable? This situation involves potential legal complications, and I want to ensure all medical decisions are well documented and appropriate. Of course, she agreed. Have them contact my office directly. By noon, Marcus returned with preliminary findings. Her credentials check out, he confirmed. We've verified with primary sources, licensing boards, certification programs, academic institutions. Everything matches her application materials. And the documentation regarding Lowry? Marcus's expression darkened. The digital evidence appears authentic. Metadata timestamps, email headers, everything is consistent with her timeline. If she fabricated this, it would have required extensive technical expertise. Your professional assessment? He hesitated only briefly. She's telling the truth. Lowry is retaliating against a former victim who escaped his control. I nodded, having reached the same conclusion. Prepare a detailed brief for the board. I want them to understand exactly what we're dealing with, not just a personnel matter, but potential legal liability if we mishandle this. What about Lowry's threat to go public? We'll address that directly. In fact, I made a decision. I want to speak with Vanessa again before the board meeting. Can you have her come to my office at 1? When Vanessa arrived, she looked marginally better than the previous day, though still visibly stressed. I invited her to sit in the more comfortable seating area rather than across my desk, a subtle shift in dynamics. We've reviewed your documentation, I began, watching relief wash over her face. Your credentials are verified, and the evidence regarding Dr. Lowry is compelling. Thank you for taking it seriously, she said quietly. Many people haven't. Dr. Lowry has escalated his campaign, I continued. He's contacted board members and local media with vague allegations about patient safety concerns. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture that didn't escape my notice. Ms. Chen, Vanessa, I'm concerned about the impact this situation is having on your health and your pregnancy. Dr. Santos, our obstetrics consultant, has indicated that this level of sustained stress could have medical implications. I can handle it, she insisted, though her exhausted appearance suggested otherwise. I'm sure you can, I acknowledged. But should you have to? I'm prepared to approve medical leave, effective immediately, if Dr. Santos recommends it after consultation. This would remove you from the immediate situation while we address Lowry's accusations. She studied my face, clearly searching for ulterior motives. Why would you do this? Given everything with Jason? I met her gaze directly. Because it's the professionally appropriate response to a staff member experiencing harassment and health concerns. My personal history with Jason is irrelevant to this situation. Tears welled in her eyes. I never meant to hurt you. When I met Jason, I had no idea who he was married to. By the time I found out, I held up a hand, gently interrupting. Vanessa, I appreciate that, but this conversation isn't necessary. Our focus needs to be on addressing the current situation professionally, for everyone's benefit. She nodded, visibly gathering herself. What happens after medical leave? Will there still be an ethics investigation? The investigation into Lowry's allegations must conclude formally, but given the evidence you've provided, I anticipate a favorable outcome. As for your long-term position here, I paused, considering my next words carefully. That depends partly on how we resolve the current situation, and partly on your own professional goals once your health concerns are addressed. The board meeting that afternoon turned into a 3-hour marathon as I methodically presented the evidence, addressing each board member's concerns with calculated precision. I had anticipated resistance, particularly from the more conservative members who instinctively protected institutional reputation above all else. But I hadn't expected their fear to manifest as anger directed at me. You've been medical director for barely a week, and we're already facing a public relations crisis, Chairman Reynolds stated, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in disapproval. Perhaps you should have consulted the board before making personnel decisions about Ms. Chen. I met his gaze steadily. With respect, Chairman, I followed established protocols for addressing both ethics complaints and staff medical concerns. Had I consulted the board prematurely, without verifying facts, we would be having a very different conversation about due process violations. Dr. Elizabeth Kwan, one of the few female board members, leaned forward. Michael Lowry has a sterling reputation in military medicine. These accusations against him are extraordinary. They are, I agreed, which is why we've verified every detail independently. The evidence Ms. Chen provided has been authenticated by our legal and IT security teams. I gestured to Marcus, who distributed additional documentation packets. You'll find their analysis in Section 3. As the board, members reviewed the materials, I continued. Beyond the immediate personnel matter, we face a critical decision point. Dr. Lowry has demonstrated a willingness to use his influence to damage both Ms. Chen and our center. How we respond will establish precedent for handling similar situations in the future. What exactly are you proposing? Reynolds asked, his tone slightly less combative. A 3-pronged approach, I replied. First, we continue Ms. Chen's reassignment to non-clinical duties, now formalized as medical leave based on Dr. Santos's recommendation. I handed over the medical documentation. Second, we engage outside counsel to evaluate potential legal action against Dr. Lowry for harassment and defamation. Third, we prepare a measured public statement addressing the vague concerns raised without dignifying false accusations with specific rebuttals. The discussion that followed was intense, with board members dividing predictably along philosophical lines. Those prioritizing institutional protection wanted to minimize publicity. Those focused on ethical standards argued for a more assertive response to Lowry's behavior. Dr. Kwan, initially skeptical, became my strongest advocate after thoroughly reviewing the evidence. This isn't just about one staff member, she argued, to her colleagues. It's about setting standards for how we handle power dynamics and professional ethics. If we don't stand firm now, we're tacitly enabling similar behavior throughout our institution. By meeting's end, I had secured qualified approval for my approach, with the condition that any public statements or legal actions receive final board review. It wasn't complete autonomy, but it was enough to proceed with protecting both Vanessa and the center. As board members filed out, Reynolds lingered, his expression inscrutable. Bold moves for your first week, Dr. Ramirez. Necessary ones, I countered. Would you have preferred I ignore credible evidence of harassment to avoid uncomfortable conversations? He studied me thoughtfully. You know, the board was divided on your appointment. Some felt you were too young, too progressive for a military-affiliated institution. And now? Now I believe they're seeing why I advocated for you. He offered a rare smile. Keep leading with integrity, Doctor. Just remember, to bring us along for the journey rather than presenting fate's accomplice. After he left, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction before calling Jason. He answered immediately, tension evident in his voice. The board has approved Vanessa's medical leave, I informed him without preamble. Dr. Santos will oversee her care plan. Has she scheduled a consultation yet? This afternoon, he confirmed. Thank you, Sophia. I know this situation is complicated for you. It's complicated for everyone, I acknowledged. But professionally, it's straightforward. We don't allow staff to be harassed, period. A pause then. How are you handling this personally? It can't be easy navigating all these intersecting relationships. The question caught me off guard with its genuine concern. For a moment, I considered deflecting, maintaining the professional distance I'd carefully constructed. Instead, I found myself answering honestly. One day at a time. It helps to focus on what's directly in front of me rather than the tangled history or uncertain future. I've always admired that about you, he said quietly. Your ability to compartmentalize, when necessary, without losing your humanity in the process. The compliment was unexpected, stirring complicated feelings I'd been suppressing beneath layers of professional focus. I should go, I said, retreating to safer ground. The communications team is waiting for direction on our public response. Of course? But Sophia? He hesitated. When this situation stabilizes, I think we should talk, really talk, without agendas or professional constraints. I considered declining, then surprised myself again. Perhaps, let's get through the immediate crisis first. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation evolved rapidly. Vanessa's medical leave was formalized, with Dr. Santos documenting pregnancy complications exacerbated by workplace stress. Our legal team sent a cease and desist letter to Dr. Lowry, accompanied by evidence that his allegations constituted retaliatory harassment. His response was immediate and revealing, rather than persisting. He withdrew his complaints entirely, apparently unwilling to have his own conduct scrutinized. The center issued a measured public statement, acknowledging that we had investigated. Concerns about credentialing processes and confirmed all protocols had been followed appropriately. The potential media storm dissipated before it fully formed, with local outlets moving on to more sensational stories. Throughout this period, I maintained professional distance from both Jason and Vanessa, interacting with them only as necessary, through proper channels. Jason respected these boundaries, limiting his communications to essential updates about Vanessa's health status and department operations. The physical therapy team continued functioning efficiently under his interim leadership, demonstrating that whatever personal complications existed, his professional capabilities remained intact. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I received a hand-delivered envelope. Inside was a formal letter from Vanessa, requesting a private meeting to discuss future professional arrangements. I scheduled it for the following morning, curious about her intentions now that the immediate crisis had passed. She arrived precisely on time, looking markedly better than when I'd last seen her. The color had returned to her cheeks, and though her pregnancy was now more pronounced, she moved with greater ease, the tension visibly diminished from her posture. Thank you for meeting with me, Dr. Ramirez, she began formally as she took the offered seat. Of course, I understand from Dr. Santos that your health has improved significantly. It has, she confirmed. The reduced stress has made a substantial difference. She placed a folder on my desk. I've been reflecting deeply on my position here, and I've come to a difficult decision. I opened the folder to find a formal resignation. Letter, effective in 2 weeks. You're leaving the center? I kept my tone neutral, concealing my surprise. Yes, I've accepted a position at a private rehabilitation clinic in Northern California. She met my gaze directly. This decision isn't about avoiding Lowry's influence or running from complicated situations. It's about making a fresh start somewhere without entanglements. Does Jason know about this decision? A flicker of pain crossed her face. We've been discussing it for the past week. He's supportive, though it obviously complicates our personal situation. I studied Vanessa carefully, noting the resolve beneath her outward composure. May I ask what prompted this decision? The situation with Dr. Lowry seems to be resolved, and your position here is secure." She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "When I came to San Diego, I was running from a toxic situation without fully processing what had happened. I was vulnerable, desperate for safety and connection." Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly. "Then I met Jason, and everything happened so quickly. The pregnancy, discovering he was married to you, the ethics investigation. It's been a whirlwind with no time for reflection." I nodded, understanding better than she might have realized. My own journey to medical director had been similarly compressed, professional advancement accelerated by personal upheaval. "During these weeks of medical leave," she continued, "I've had time to think clearly for the first time in months. I realized I need to establish my own foundation, professionally and personally, without depending on relationships for security or advancement." "And Jason?" I asked, unable to completely separate my professional interest from lingering personal curiosity. A mix of emotions crossed her face. "We care deeply for each other, and we're committed to co-parenting regardless of geography. But we've agreed to step back from romantic involvement until we can be certain it's based on genuine connection rather than circumstantial needs." She looked directly at me. "He's still processing the end of your marriage, Dr. Ramirez. We both recognize that now." The candor was unexpected but somehow appropriate. Three professionals acknowledging complicated truths without drama. "I appreciate your honesty," I said. "And while I accept your resignation, I want you to know that this decision isn't necessary from the center's perspective. Your work has been exceptional, and we would be disappointed to lose your expertise." "Thank you for that. It means more than you might imagine, especially coming from you." She hesitated, then added, "I've struggled with whether my presence here is unfair to you, given everything that's happened. My personal history with Jason has no bearing on your professional opportunities," I replied firmly. "I meant what I said about separating personal and professional considerations." "Even so, a fresh start feels right," she said with quiet certainty. "The clinic in Northern California specializes in trauma recovery for first responders. Their approach aligns perfectly with my background, and the distance will give everyone space to heal and move forward appropriately." I nodded, respecting her decision even as I recognized the professional loss to our center. "I'll process your resignation today. Would you like me to include a letter of recommendation? Your handling of the Lowry situation demonstrated remarkable professionalism under extraordinary pressure." Surprise flickered across her face, followed by genuine gratitude. "That would be incredibly generous. Thank you." As she rose to leave, she paused, seemingly wrestling with whether to say something more. Finally, she spoke softly. "He never stopped respecting you, you know. Even when your marriage was faltering, Jason always spoke of your intelligence and dedication with profound admiration." Before I could formulate a response to this unexpected revelation, she continued, "I'm not telling you this to complicate things, but because I think everyone deserves to know when they're valued, even from a distance." After she left, I sat motionless, absorbing the layers of our interaction. Vanessa's decision represented another axis of change in an already dynamic situation, one that would require adjustments from everyone involved. The professional implications were straightforward enough. I needed to begin recruitment for her replacement and adjust department plans accordingly. The personal implications were more nebulous, ripples in an emotional landscape I had deliberately kept neatly compartmentalized. My contemplation was interrupted by my assistant announcing Marcus had arrived with urgent updates from the board. The familiar rhythm of institutional responsibilities provided welcome structure, pulling me back to the immediate demands of leadership. That evening, as I was preparing to leave, I received a text from Jason. "Heard Vanessa met with you today. Can we talk? Dinner tomorrow?" I stared at my phone, weighing the implications of accepting his invitation. The clear professional boundaries I'd established had served me well during the crisis, providing emotional distance and ethical clarity. Yet with Vanessa's resignation and imminent departure, the dynamics were shifting again. I typed my response carefully. Okay. Shoreline Bistro, 7 p.m. This is a personal dinner, not a work meeting. His reply came immediately. Understood. Thank you. Sophia. I arrived at Shoreline Bistro exactly at 7 the following evening, deliberately choosing a restaurant far from the medical center to emphasize the non-professional nature of our meeting. Jason was already seated at a quiet corner table, rising, as I approached. Thank you for coming, he said as I took my seat, his voice carrying the careful neutrality we'd both adopted in recent weeks. Vanessa told me about her resignation, I said after we'd ordered drinks, bypassing small talk. She seems certain about her decision. She is, he confirmed. It's been a difficult conclusion to reach, but I think it's the right one for her. For everyone, really. And what about you? I asked directly. What's your plan now? He looked momentarily surprised by my directness, then thoughtful. Professionally, I'm committed to the center. The work we're doing with veterans matters deeply to me, and I've found purpose there that I was missing after my discharge. And personally? Jason met my gaze steadily. Personally, I'm focusing on preparing for fatherhood while giving Vanessa the space she needs to establish herself in Northern California. We'll figure out co-parenting logistics as things evolve. That sounds remarkably mature, I observed, not entirely keeping the surprise from my voice. A rueful smile crossed his face. 6 months ago, I was a mess, angry about my medical discharge, uncertain about civilian life, taking my frustrations out on our marriage instead of addressing them directly. Meeting Vanessa seemed like an easy escape from doing the hard work of healing. The self-awareness in his assessment was new, reminiscent of the thoughtful man I had first fallen in love with years ago. These past weeks have been clarifying, he continued. Watching you handle the Lowry situation with such integrity, seeing Vanessa stand up for herself, it's made me reconsider my own choices and responsibilities. Our drinks arrived, providing a momentary pause in the conversation. I took a sip of wine, organizing my thoughts before responding. Why did you want to have dinner, Jason? What are we doing here? Honestly, he hesitated, then continued with quiet conviction. I wanted to thank you properly, without the constraints of our professional roles. What you did for Vanessa, how you handled the entire situation. It was remarkable, especially given how personally complicated it must have been for you. I did my job, I replied simply. Personal history doesn't change professional ethics. No, you did more than your job, he countered gently. You showed compassion where many would have found convenient reasons for distance or bureaucratic barriers. You protected someone who had every reason to expect your resentment instead. I took another sip of wine, uncomfortable with his praise yet recognizing its sincerity. The easy path would have been to let the ethics investigation proceed without intervention, to allow Lowry's accusations to create enough doubt that Vanessa would leave on her own. That would have been professionally defensible, but ethically questionable. That's exactly my point, Jason said, leaning forward slightly. You consistently choose the harder, more principled path, even when easier options are available. It's who you've always been. Our entrees arrived, temporarily shifting our focus to the practical business of dining. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, something I wouldn't have predicted given our recent history. After a few moments, Jason spoke again, his tone more measured. There's something else I wanted to say, something I've been thinking about a lot since everything happened with Lowry. He set down his fork, giving me his full attention. I owe you an apology, a real one, not the half-hearted attempts I've made since our separation. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. When I returned from Afghanistan, I was struggling in ways I couldn't articulate. The medical discharge felt like failure, and watching you thrive professionally while I floundered. I resented your success instead of celebrating it. His gaze remained steady, unflinching. I blamed you for not understanding what I was going through, when the truth is, I never gave you the chance. I kept you at arm's length, then punished you for the distance I created. The raw honesty caught me off guard. During our marriage, Jason had rarely been this forthcoming about his emotional landscape, preferring to process internally or through the structured environment of therapy. "Why tell me this now?" I asked quietly. "Because you deserve to hear it," he replied simply. "And because I need to say it, to acknowledge the reality of what happened between us. My relationship with Vanessa, the pregnancy, they were symptoms of my avoidance, not the cause of our problems." I nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in his words. "We both contributed to the breakdown of our marriage, Jason. I became so focused on providing clinical support that I sometimes forgot to just be your wife. There's a balance I never quite found." "You were doing your best with what I gave you," he said gently, which wasn't much at the end. The conversation shifted to safer topics as we finished our meals. Updates on mutual friends, changes at the center, the upcoming spring fundraiser for the veteran support programs. The easy rhythm of our interaction reminded me of earlier days in our relationship, before deployment and career pressures had erected barriers between us. As we waited for dessert, Jason's expression grew more serious again. "There's one more professional matter I should mention, though I wasn't sure whether to bring it up tonight." "What is it?" I asked, immediately alert to his shift in tone. "The Integrated Trauma Program leadership, the position Vanessa was originally considered for before everything happened with Lowry. Dr. Winters approached me yesterday about taking on that role. I carefully kept my expression neutral. Are you interested in it?" "I am," he admitted. "The program aligns perfectly with my experience and vision for veteran care. But given our history and your position as medical director, you're concerned about conflicts of interest," I finished for him. "Yes. I don't want to put you in an awkward position, professionally or personally. I considered this carefully. The reporting structure would still go through Dr. Winters for your performance evaluations and compensation decisions. As long as those boundaries remain in place, I don't see a professional impediment to you pursuing the position." "And personally?" he asked, his voice quieter. "Personally?" I paused, organizing my thoughts. "I think we're both demonstrating that we can navigate complex situations with maturity. Your qualifications and vision for the program should be the determining factors, not our past." Relief crossed his face. "Thank you. I wanted to be transparent about it before proceeding." As we finished our dessert and prepared to leave, Jason hesitated. "Sophia, I know we can't go back to what we were before. Too much has happened, and we've both changed too significantly. But I'd like to think we could eventually find our way to some kind of friendship, one built on mutual respect and our shared history, rather than obligation or guilt." The proposition hung between us, neither simple nor straightforward. 6. Months ago, I would have dismissed it outright, too raw from betrayal to contemplate any ongoing connection. Now, with professional success providing solid ground beneath my feet, and the acute pain of our separation dulled by time and perspective, the possibility seemed less impossible. "I think that might be possible," I said carefully. "Not immediately, and not without effort, but eventually." 2 months later, standing in my office reviewing the quarterly reports, I reflected on how dramatically circumstances had evolved. Vanessa had relocated to Northern California, settling into her new position with apparent success based on the occasional updates Jason shared during our professional interactions. The Integrated Trauma Program was flourishing under his leadership, already showing promising results for veterans struggling with complex physical and psychological symptoms. The divorce had been finalized without drama, the papers processed and filed with the same efficiency that characterized our professional relationship. We had divided assets equitably, each keeping what mattered most to us. neither seeking to punish the other through legal mechanisms. My role as medical director had solidified, initial skepticism from some board members replaced by grudging respect, as our treatment outcomes improved and donor support increased. The Lowry situation had eventually strengthened my position rather than undermining it, demonstrating my ability to navigate complex ethical challenges while protecting both individual, staff members, and institutional integrity. A knock at my door interrupted my reflection. Jason stood there, a file folder in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, remaining in the doorway until I nodded. "The Integrated Program Quarterly Report," he said, placing the folder on my desk. "We've exceeded projected outcomes in most categories, particularly for veterans with traumatic brain injuries co-occurring with PTSD." "That's excellent," I said, genuinely impressed as I skimmed the data. "The multidisciplinary approach is clearly working." "It is," he agreed, then hesitated before offering the small bag. "This is more personal. Today marks 6 months since your appointment as medical director. I thought it deserved acknowledgement." Surprised, I accepted the bag and removed a small, elegantly wrapped package. Inside was a crystal paperweight engraved with a quote from Maya Angelou: "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." "It reminded me of you," Jason said simply. "Your commitment to growth and integrity, professionally and personally." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "It's perfect." He nodded, maintaining a respectful distance. "I should get back to my department. We have new patients arriving this afternoon." As he turned to leave, I found myself saying, "Jason, Vanessa's ultrasound was scheduled for yesterday, wasn't it? Did you find out?" A smile spread across his face. Not the complicated, burdened expression I'd grown accustomed to seeing, but something lighter, infused with genuine joy. "A girl, healthy and developing perfectly." "I'm happy for you both," I said, surprised. To discover I meant it sincerely. After he left, I placed the crystal paperweight on my desk, where sunlight from the window caught its facets, scattering prisms across my reports. 6 months ago, I could never have imagined this moment, standing confidently as medical director, exchanging civil, almost friendly conversations with my ex-husband about his child with another woman. Life rarely followed predictable paths. The painful upheaval that had initially seemed like professional and personal devastation had ultimately cleared the way for unexpected growth. I had discovered strength and clarity through navigating complicated ethical terrain, finding my true professional voice precisely when personal certainties crumbled. The intercom buzzed. My next appointment had arrived, a potential donor interested in funding expanded PTSD research. I straightened my jacket and gathered my presentation materials, ready to advocate for the work that had become not just my career, but my purpose. Whatever complications remained in my personal landscape, my professional path had never been clearer. I moved toward the door. I caught a final glimpse of the crystal paperweight catching the afternoon light. "Do better," it reminded me. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I was. 5 years later, I stood at the podium overlooking a crowded auditorium, the culmination of a journey I could never have predicted that fateful day when Vanessa confronted me in the break room. The newly constructed Integrative Trauma Recovery Wing at our center represented not just an expansion of our facilities, but a revolution in how military medicine approached veteran healing. "Today marks more than a building dedication," I began, my voice carrying confidently through the space. "It represents a fundamental shift in how we understand trauma recovery, acknowledging that true healing requires integration of physical, psychological, and spiritual dimensions." From my vantage point, I could see the entire audience, board members, donors, staff, and most significantly, the veterans whose lives had been transformed by our programs. In the front row sat Jason, now our chief of integrative medicine, with his daughter Emma beside him, fidgeting slightly in her fancy dress. At 4.5, she was a striking combination of both parents, Vanessa's warm eyes and Jason's determined chin. Vanessa herself sat 2 seats away, having flown in specifically for the dedication. Her private practice in Northern California had flourished into a respected trauma recovery center of its own, and we had developed a professional collaboration that benefited veterans across the West Coast. Between them sat Thomas, Vanessa's husband of 2 years, a pediatric surgeon she had met during a medical conference. The complexity of our interconnected lives no longer felt strange or painful, merely a testament to how human relationships evolve in unexpected ways. This new wing represents 5 years of research, clinical innovation, and most importantly, listening to our veterans about what actually helps them heal, I continued. It would not exist without the pioneering work of our integrative medicine team, led by Dr. Jason Ramirez. I gestured toward Jason, who nodded professionally as applause filled the room. Our working relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose that transcended our personal history. After completing my address and cutting the ceremonial ribbon, I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and engaging with donors. Eventually, I found myself in a quiet moment with Vanessa, watching from a distance as Jason showed Emma the meditation garden designed specifically for families. "She's beautiful," I said sincerely. "You and Jason have done an amazing job co-parenting." Vanessa smiled. The tension that had characterized our early interactions long since dissolved. "It hasn't always been easy with the distance, but we've made it work. Thomas has been wonderful too. Having a blended family dynamic that actually functions feels like its own kind of miracle." "Life rarely follows the path we expect," I observed, thinking of my own journey. "No," she agreed. "When I confronted you that day, pregnant, terrified, angry, I never imagined we'd be standing here 5 years later as colleagues and—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "People who've learned to wish each other well," I supplied. "Exactly." Her expression grew more serious. "I never properly thanked you for what you did during the Lowry situation. You could have let me drown, and no one would have blamed you." "I think they would have," I countered gently. "More importantly, I would have." Later that evening, after the formal celebrations concluded, I found myself walking the quiet corridors of the new wing with Jason. Emma had gone to dinner with Vanessa and Thomas, giving us a rare moment of uninterrupted conversation. "Remember when you became medical director and I found out during that all-staff meeting?" Jason asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I thought my career was over." I laughed softly at the memory. "And I thought handling my estranged husband and his pregnant girlfriend in my workplace would be the greatest challenge of my professional life. Instead, it became the foundation for the most innovative trauma recovery program in the country." He stopped walking, turning to face me directly. "We've come a long way from that break room confrontation." "We have," I agreed, thinking of all that had transpired: professional triumphs and challenges, personal growth, and unexpected connections. "Are you seeing anyone?" he asked suddenly, the question catching me off guard. I realized I haven't asked in a while. "I've been dating David for about 6 months," I admitted, thinking of the thoughtful environmental lawyer I'd met through a mutual friend. "It's going well, actually. He understands my schedule and respects my work." Jason smiled genuinely. "I'm glad, Sophia. You deserve someone who appreciates all of who you are." As we completed our walk through the new facility, checking that everything was prepared for the first patients arriving the following week, I reflected on how profoundly different my life was from what I had once envisioned. The painful disruption of my marriage had ultimately cleared space for unprecedented professional growth and deeper self-understanding. "You know what's strange?" I said, as we prepared to go our separate ways in the parking lot. If someone had told me 5 years ago that my husband's pregnant girlfriend confronting me at work would eventually lead to all of this, I gestured toward the building behind us. I would have thought they were delusional. Jason laughed. Life's greatest opportunities often arrive disguised as our worst problems. As I drove home that night, I thought about the tangled path that had led to this moment, how shock and betrayal had transformed into purpose and clarity. My greatest professional achievement had emerged from my most painful personal crisis, not despite it, but perhaps because of it. The boundaries between personal and professional were never as clear as we pretended, and sometimes the most profound. Growth happened precisely at their intersection. The center's new motto, inscribed above the entrance to the integrative wing, seemed fitting not just for our veterans, but for all of us who had found our way through unexpected terrain. Healing happens when we integrate all parts of our story. 10 years later, I stood in the doorway of my office, watching the sunset paint the San Diego coastline in vibrant oranges and pinks. The familiar view had been my anchor through a decade of transitions, challenges, and unexpected growth. Tomorrow, I would give my final address as medical director before stepping into my new role as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs for the Western region, a position that would allow me to implement the innovative approaches we'd pioneered at our center on a much larger scale. A gentle knock at the door pulled me from my reverie. David entered, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes as he loosened his tie. After 5 years of marriage, his presence still brought a sense of calm centeredness that had been missing from my life for so long. The dinner's all set up, in the conference room, he said, joining me at the window. Everyone's arriving. Are you ready? I nodded, taking a final glance around the office I had occupied for a decade. Boxes were stacked neatly in the corner, my personal belongings carefully packed for the transition. On the wall hung framed photographs documenting the center's evolution, ribbon cuttings, award ceremonies, and most significantly, veterans whose lives had been transformed by our integrative approach to trauma recovery. 10 years, I murmured, more to myself than to David. Sometimes it feels like yesterday when I walked into this office as the newly appointed medical director. David squeezed my hand gently. And now you're leaving to revolutionize veteran care across 5 states. Not bad for a decade's work. The farewell dinner was intimate by design. Just 20 key people who had been instrumental in the center's transformation. As we entered the conference room, I was struck by the unlikely tapestry of relationships that had formed through shared purpose and mutual respect. Jason was there with Emma, now a poised 14-year-old with her father's quiet confidence and analytical mind. Beside them sat Vanessa and Thomas, who had flown in from Northern California for the occasion. Their twin boys, now 7, were spending the evening with Emma's grandparents, a family connection that had developed organically over years of co-parenting across distances. Marcus Chen, still our legal counsel and now a close friend, raised his glass in greeting. Dr. Santos, though officially retired, had returned specifically for this gathering. Board members, colleagues, and even Dr. Winters had made the journey to mark this transition. As dinner progressed, conversation flowed easily among people whose lives had intersected in the most unexpected ways. I found myself at one point seated between Vanessa and Jason, the 3 of us discussing Emma's interest in neuropsychology, a career path that would merge her father's medical background with my own specialty. She grilled me for an hour last week about traumatic brain injuries, Jason said with evident pride. I finally had to tell her she needed to save some questions for when she shadows you next month. The mentorship arrangement had been Emma's idea, a week observing my work as part of her advanced science curriculum. The fact that no one found this unusual anymore was perhaps the most remarkable testament to how far we'd all come. She has your methodical approach to problem solving, I told Jason, and Vanessa's intuitive understanding of people. Vanessa smiled, a moment of shared appreciation passing between us. She also has your determination, Sophia. The way she sets a goal and systematically works toward it, that comes from watching you all these years. The observation touched me deeply. Though not Emma's mother, I had become an important presence in her life, a different kind of role, model than I ever expected to be. Our relationship had evolved naturally, without forced intimacy or artificial boundaries, into something authentic and meaningful for us both. After dinner, Marcus called for everyone's attention, initiating what became an impromptu series of toasts. Each person shared memories and reflections that collectively wove the story of our center's transformation, and with it, the transformation of our interconnected lives. When Jason stood to speak, he held up the crystal paperweight he had given me exactly 10 years earlier, now well worn from daily use on my desk. When I gave Sophia this paperweight with Maya Angelou's words, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." I thought I understood what it meant, he began. But watching her lead this center over the past decade has given those words deeper meaning than I ever imagined. He turned to address me directly. "Sophia, you didn't just do better when you knew better. You consistently sought to know better, so you could do better. You transformed crisis into opportunity, complexity into innovation, and most remarkably, you transformed a group of people with complicated personal histories into a collaborative team unified by purpose." When it came my turn to speak, I looked around at the faces of those who had journeyed with me through the most challenging and rewarding decade of my life. When I became medical director, I began. I was terrified that my personal circumstances would undermine my professional authority. I thought success meant rigidly separating these realms, never allowing one to influence the other. I smiled at the memory of my former certainty. What I've learned instead is that our greatest professional innovations often emerge precisely from the integration of our personal experiences, if we have the courage to examine them honestly and apply their lessons with integrity. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing once again at the window, gazing out at the lights of San Diego twinkling beneath a star-filled sky. David was deep in conversation with Thomas about environmental impact litigation, while Emma sat cross-legged on the floor with Vanessa's twins, patiently teaching them a card game. Jason joined me at the window, both of us silently appreciating the unlikely family gathering taking place behind us. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked quietly. 10 years ago, when everything was falling apart? I shook my head. Never. I was just trying to survive the next meeting without breaking down. And now look at us, he mused. Co-grandparents to the twins. Mentors to each other's departments. Friends, even, after everything. Life's complexity becomes its beauty, if you let it, I said, the insight crystallizing as I spoke it. Later that night, as David and I walked to our car under the moonlight, he asked what I was thinking about, noting my contemplative silence. "I was thinking about turning points," I replied. "How they're rarely recognized in the moment. 10 years ago, when Vanessa confronted me in that break room, pregnant with Jason's child, I thought it was the worst day of my professional life. And now? Now I see it was actually the first day of the most meaningful chapter of my career. Not despite the personal complications, but because of them. They forced me to develop capacities I might never have discovered otherwise." As we drove home along the coast, I thought about the new challenges awaiting me in the regional commissioner's role, the bureaucracy I would navigate, the resistance to change I would inevitably encounter, the political complexities of implementing meaningful reform across multiple states. But I carried with me the most valuable lesson from the past decade: that our greatest professional contributions often emerge from our deepest personal challenges, if we can find the courage to integrate them rather than compartmentalize them. The very complications that once threatened to derail my career had ultimately become its greatest source of innovation and purpose. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, new challenges, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, I allowed myself to appreciate the remarkable journey that had brought me here. A journey that began with a confrontation I once feared would destroy everything, but which had ultimately created something far more meaningful than I could have imagined.